Welcome everyone to Elected Officials to Protect America and our veterans from across the United States on our press conference focusing on the EPA Clean Car Standards. The Environmental Protection Agency has proposed federal legislation emission standards that aim to ensure 67% of new light-duty vehicles and 25% of new heavy-duty trucks sold in the United States are electric by 2032. And we wholeheartedly support this endeavor to ensure we can protect our families, communities, and ensure a prosperous future for everyone locally and globally. Today, we have elected officials from across the United States who are veterans who will be chatting about the importance of these standards within their districts. I'd like to start the press conference off with Council Member Gary Schlack, who is a U.S. Army veteran. Gary?
Thank you, Alex, for that introduction. As Alex stated, my name is Gary Schlack, and I'm a city councilman in Allen Park, Michigan. It's a small bedroom community, roughly about 28,000 residents, with strong ties to the auto industry. Well, in Michigan right now, automakers are committed to ramping up production to electric vehicles and holding the EPA standards to the fire. And I believe that's going to be true over the next coming decade. They feel strong that AVs are the future. And as I said, I agree. And the federal government has their back. It's time that they really start looking at workers and look at UAW workers. And as the ongoing strike continues, it's going to continue to eat into that. So we have to look at UAW workers, because UAW workers are skilled, they're dedicated, they're well-trained and loyal. They deserve contracts that reflect the reality, not only for today, but retirement and beyond. When grandpa manufactured that car and worked for that company, that's the car they're going to work and purchase. Workers have made concessions. It's time for Ford, GM, and Chrysler's parent company, Stellantis, come to the table. EV vehicles and with these EPA standards put in place are a hot issue, and these workers are concerned that these jobs, if they go non-union, competitive wages will fall. And if kind of wages fall, it's not just for the auto industry, it'll affect our whole country. And part of that is making sure EPA emission standards are held up, as Alex mentioned some facts about that. Now, I get asked a bit, is that possible? I say absolutely it's possible. It takes a lot of manpower required to produce this, required skilled manpower and labor. The UAW supports this transition, but the auto manufacturers need to come on board. They need to make sure the tax incentives provided by the federal government serve these American workers. These EPA standards will be upheld in union shops. Research time and time again has shown that to be true. So automakers need to definitely look at these UAW workers, these skilled workers, what they've done for the country, and know that it's a big part of our country. New vision of the auto industry cannot survive with unions like UAW. But we need to support the backs of labor. Good jobs, affordable healthcare, education for families, retirement security, and corporate accountability equals real democracy. Real democracy by supporting these workers and supporting the auto industry together. That's a democracy that I can get around. That's a democracy that automakers have an obligation to fulfill for our country. I'm wearing red today in solidarity to the supporters of the UAW as they strike. Strike to really put pressure on the auto industry to hold them to the fire. And that, I yield, I suppose.
You yield your time. Well, thank you, sir.
I yield my time.
We're so used to our parliamentary procedure.
So
we can
used
bring
to,
it,
yeah.
Maybe we should be doing that more often in the civil world to make things more civil. Great, but I think you made a really good point out with how important the jobs are from this transition to electric vehicles. I mean, it has the potential to create 150,000 new jobs, and the jobs aren't isolated in one place. I mean, it's some of the studies show that these jobs would be within 48 states and 1,200 facilities, which is another exciting part about being able to continue to protect our health while continuing our prosperity. So next, I'd love to introduce Assembly Member Santa Barbara from New York, who is also a U.S. Army veteran.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to join all of you today. This important matter of paramount importance. The future of our environment the health of our community, security of our nation. As a member of the New York State Assembly, a longstanding member of the Energy Committee, and I'm also a civil engineer by trade, I have seen firsthand the critical need action to combat climate change and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. The Environmental Protection Agency, in its recent efforts, has proposed stringent federal emissions cars and light-duty vehicles. These standards are not just regulatory measures. They represent a pivotal step towards accelerating the transition to electric vehicles. And here, we have been very aggressive to provide charging stations, to provide of our own, to make sure that these vehicles are available to all who want the opportunity to switch over. There are a number of elected officials, a number of organizations that are supporting this initiative, recognizing that they are essential to cutting greenhouse, stabilizing our climate, and safeguarding public health across the nation. Moreover, Inflation Reduction Act, with its historic $369 billion action, is poised to cut economy-wide emissions by up to 43% relative to 2005 levels. That is quite a significant step, and it was an important action. This investment is a game changer. And the first EPA report on 2022 climate and infrastructure law underscores its significance. It is of our commitment to addressing the climate crisis, reducing pollution from types of cars and light-duty vehicles through strong EPA federal emission standards is a critical in the battle against climate change. To accomplish the goal set by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, greenhouse gas must peak before 2025 and decline 43% by 2030. This is about protecting our environment. It's about preventing the extreme weather events that drive nations and global climate conflicts, making climate change a national security threat, as the Department of Defense warns. We have seen a number of extreme events here in New York State, millions and millions of dollars, and we're still recovering from some of the extreme events. We've all experienced this across the entire country, and we're seeing it globally as well. EPA clean car standards play a pivotal role in mitigating this crisis. These ensure that 67% of new light-duty vehicles and 25% of trucks sold in the U.S. are electric by 2032. Cleaning up the transportation, which is responsible for 27% of total emissions and 45% of U.S. oil consumption, one of the most significant steps we can take to fight climate change and protect our children's future. However, we must also acknowledge that the environmental injustices that have plagued our communities for far. Communities of color living near heavily trafficked roads and roadways have borne the brunt of cars and trucks, often due to systematic racism and infrastructure policies. That charging stations for electric vehicles are built in historically neglected areas to rectify this injustice. And again, and here in New York State, we're making efforts to do this through legislation that we've already, and we're seeing other states take similar action as well. The benefits of transitioning to levels are manyfold. It will reduce emissions, dioxide, methane, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and hydrocarbons, significant inequality in communities across the country. Fine particulate matter, one of the main pollutants responsible for tens of thousands of premature deaths in the U.S. each year. The proposed standards are expected to avoid nearly 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions through 2020. While the EPA can't control the number of vehicles sold by manufacturers, it does have the authority to the average amount of pollution generated by each manufacturer's fleet of vehicles. These state cars and trucks from model years 2027 to 2032 are a crucial step towards a cleaner, more sustainable future. And it's not just the US that recognizes the urgency of this transition. Other countries like the European Union, Canada, and Britain have already enacted regulations to phase clean-powered vehicles. We must keep pace with these global efforts. The Infrastructure Investment Act dropped $7.5 billion to build a nationwide network of 500,000 EV charging stations, making electric vehicles more accessible to all Americans. The Inflation Reduction Act includes subsidies and consumer tax credits to further incentivize the adoption of electric vehicles. The private sector is on these incentives, committing more than $120 billion in domestic EV and battery investments since the IRA became law. This investment will support manufacturing of millions of per year, positioning the U.S. as a global EV competitor. And here in New York State and other states have taken their own critical actions towards cleaner cars. These are a clear signal to the industry and the public about the direction in which the market is heading. So, the transition to electric vehicles is not just an environmental imperative. It's a matter of security, public health, and environmental justice. We have the tools, the investments, and the momentum to make this transition a reality. So let us all work together to build a cleaner, more sustainable future for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you for the opportunity and the time to speak on this critical issue.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Particularly the point I think you made, the IRA will get us to 43%, but it's the rules and implementation of them that will get us to the 50% by 2030, which we have a national goal and international goal for. So it's exciting to see how we can do this while helping our economy and health. So next, I'd love to introduce State Representative Sariana from New Mexico and an Air Force veteran.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. I'm Representative Debbie Sariana from Albuquerque, New Mexico. In the legislature, I'm proud to serve as Vice Chair of the New Mexico House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak about this important issue that's near and dear to my heart. We can no longer deny climate change. The science is clear. Greenhouse gas emissions are having a devastating impact on the environment and ecosystem we depend on. We see effects worldwide. Here in New Mexico, it looks like longer, hotter summer temperatures, milder winters threatening already fragile supplies of fresh water, forest fires of record size and number, devastating homes, businesses, and land across our state. The biggest contributor to these greenhouse gas emissions is fossil fuel-powered transportation, contributing to air pollution that harms our environment and public health, and polluting our groundwater, which is vital and increasingly scarce resource, especially in desert communities like mine. But making the transition to clean cars is a huge step in the right direction. By reducing our dependence on fossil fuel-powered transportation, we can reduce the emissions fueling climate change and protect our precious air, land, and water. As a proud military veteran, Air Force, it's also worth noting that our climate crisis poses serious threats to our national security. U.S. intelligence officials warn that rising sea levels and extreme weather threatens our military infrastructure and readiness. These changes have the potential to raise geopolitical tension and increased instability. But I'm proud to say that my home state, New Mexico, is already a national leader in climate. Under our landmark Energy Transition Act in 2019, New Mexico set bold renewable energy standards and established a pathway to low carbon energy. This year, we created a dedicated stream of long-term funding for conservation with a brand new Land of Enchantment Legacy Fund. And in our state budget, we have made historic investments in both enforcing existing environmental rules and regulations and in developing innovative new solutions to addressing the impact of climate change. Now we are continuing this forward progress by taking critical steps to making clean cars more accessible to everyday New Mexicans. Earlier this year, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham announced plans to adopt advanced clean cars and advanced clean truck rules. These are similar to the EPA proposals. Our new rules require automakers to deliver an increasing number of new zero-emission cars and light-duty trucks. To facilitate the transition, New Mexico required increased it required percentage increases each year, with 43% of new cars and light-duty trucks sold in New Mexico by the electric models to be electric models by 2026, and up to 82% by 2032, which is ambitious, but we're going to try. The adoption of such emissions rules will improve the air quality and have health, economic, and climate benefits for our state. As we move forward, we are also looking at creative ways to help families get into EVs and add charging capacity to homes, apartments, and workplaces, as well as incentivizing the sales of these vehicles by dealers. To support this transition, we have also passed key legislation to ensure New Mexico is a great place to own electric vehicles, including increasing EV infrastructure and an energy grid modernization to support these vehicles. We now have 500 EV chargers in place across the state. We are also utilizing $38 million in federal funding for the bipartisan infrastructure deal to help us further build out our EV infrastructure. New Mexico is a big state. We're going to need a lot. We've also made sure we can make efficient use of these dollars with designated alternative fuel corridors along the major interstates and highways throughout the state. So in closing, I am proud of the progress New Mexico has made in leading the charge to address climate change and adopt clean cars. I'm also heartened to see so many others on this call committed to this cause. We can't turn back the clock, but what we can do is utilize our collective knowledge, tools, and resources to slow down, adapt, and mitigate the impact of climate change. Speeding up the transition to clean cars is a huge piece of that puzzle by reducing harmful emissions and improving air quality across the nation. Thank you for the opportunity to present today, and please feel free to reach out with any questions about climate and clean car work we're doing in New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. It was wonderful to come and speak to your legislature as well. And also to underscore the last point you made too, that the amount of lives this will save from premature deaths ranges between 85,000 to 200,000 a year in the US from the air quality this will help improve. So it has a real impact on communities across the United States. Next, I'd love to introduce Alex Walker-Griffin. He's the mayor of Hercules in California, and also an Army veteran, soon to be Navy at some point.
Well, thank you, Alex. And yesterday was the Military Police Corps' birthday, so happy birthday to all my fellow MPs and 31 series out there. But good morning, everybody. Really excited to talk about this topic. Representing the great state of California, I'm about 25 minutes away from San Francisco, 20 minutes away from Napa. So one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I'm happy to say that California is leading the way. I'm sorry to my other states out there, but there's no place like the Golden State. As some of you are pretty familiar with this at this point, California has made, and Governor Gavin Newsom has made a pretty strong statement. By 2035, we are cutting off the sale of gas-powered cars in the state. And at the same time, too, we're working with our car dealerships here in the state to make sure that they can actually afford to do so by having financial incentives to want to sell electric vehicles. And this is not only just a great opportunity for car dealerships who may be a little bit skeptical about transitioning into the EV sector, but at the same time making it more easier for families who, quite frankly, up until recently, probably wouldn't have been able to afford an electric vehicle. And that's something that I think we really need to highlight and underscore, that historically, when it comes to a lot of environmental issues that we want to tackle, largely it's been a game of whether or not you can afford to play it. And so we want to give a huge shout out to the Biden administration for creating tax incentives to want to make people purchase electric vehicles. But at the same time, here locally, we're putting our money where our mouth is too. I'm happy to say that here in town, we're installing a series of 16 EV stations throughout the city, making that number up to 25 EV charging stations throughout the entire city. And I'm just going to say I'm really excited about that. And as much as California has led the way, we still have a big crisis going on with our environmental injustice, just as much as we like to lead the way. And our friends down in the Central Valley and Bakersfield, unfortunately, has one of the highest rates of asthma, but that's no mystery because of the gigantic oil industry presence that's in that area. So again, while we continue to work towards some of these amazing goals, we have to keep equity and working class folks in mind by establishing more tax credits to make sure that these electric vehicles are present and available. So that way, when we make this transition in 2035, we're not leaving out the Black and brown communities that are always and have historically been impacted by some of these decisions. And I know that many of my colleagues have mentioned this too, but this is a national security issue. We know that we have folks in the Middle East that would want to turn off these valves, and we're going to see gas prices skyrocket. So there's no need and really no desire at this point to want to be at the mercy for somebody who's 6,000 miles away when we can concentrate our energy right here in town. So I think this is a great opportunity. Again, this is something that's happening across the nation, federal all the way down to the local level, with people recognizing the importance of this issue. So I'm happy to stand in solidarity with all of my partners from across the country on taking on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, fellow Alex. So I just want to underscore the importance of what you were saying on the security side of us being dependent on foreign oil as well, because we make a lot of oil in the US, but because of how the markets work, we still import a tremendous amount, and we have to because we actually lack the capability to refine the oil we need for ourselves because of the ways our laws were in the past. We need to export our oil and import actually dirty oil for use in the United States. So we are still dependent on OPEC, which is an association of dictators. They're not democratic nations. So it puts us at a vulnerability. So this transition here is unbelievably important for our national security as well. Council member Joel Hicks from Pennsylvania has seen a lot of this firsthand in his time in the Navy. So, Joel?
I have. Thank you very much, Alex. I would like to remind everyone being on nuclear submarines, I never had to stop for fuel during my career. But as we know that nuclear power continues to be an important part of our decarbonized grid. And it's nice to meet you all. I am a council member here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in South Central Pennsylvania. And as some of you may know, we depend very much on the transportation sector for our local jobs. We are adjacent to two major highways, Pennsylvania Turnpike, I-81, and have one of the largest density of warehouses in the country. So transportation is inseparable from our way of life. And it's therefore the reason I'm on this call. It's the reason we have a climate action committee in Cumberland County, is to address this big challenge. About a quarter of Pennsylvania's greenhouse gases come from the transportation sector, and more than a third of the nitrogen oxide emissions that contribute to harmful human health directly due to ozone smog that come from highway vehicles. We're transitioning to EVs, we all know that, but we all know that will take time. Too many people need relief right now from the toxic air they continually have to breathe. Not only will the strong EPA clean air standards deliver significant savings to drivers over the lives of the vehicles, it'll save lives. Let's step back for a second and look nationally. Since 1990, for those of you who keep track of energy policy, that was the last major revision we have had to our national energy policy. We updated the Clean Air Act in 1990. The carbon intensity since 1990 of the electric sector has gone down by 15.1%. I will repeat that. Since 1990, the carbon intensity of the electric sector has gone down by 15.1%, while the transportation sector has increased by 17.7%. And this is despite regulatory efforts by the Department of Transportation, having updated some of their CAFE standards. But clearly that is not enough. The evidence is clear. Subsidies are a great policy tool, and they're being rolled out in unprecedented amounts via the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. However, the transportation sector simply needs a more robust strategy, including more regulation. We're lagging in meeting our goals to maintain global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. I would like to encourage our federal officials and my colleagues here on this call to take this opportunity to actually rethink transportation modalities. We have the opportunity to make our communities more walkable, more bikeable, and accessible to all of our residents at all income levels. Here in Carlisle, We're using Pennsylvania funds that flowed down from the federal government to help offset the cost of a whole suite of EV charging stations, but we're also looking at removing food deserts and making our highways and streets safer for our residents. We have to use all of these tools and approaches to limit the harmful emissions coming from the millions of vehicles that emit harmful greenhouse gases, but other harmful air pollutants. This will not only help save lives locally due to the reductions in these harmful emissions, but it will also help maintain our global greenhouse gas targets. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you all. I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Councilmember. Particularly, but folks probably aren't aware that 10 to 13 million EVs can be produced from our own batteries at home. That's the capacity we have coming on right now. So that's extremely exciting between the battery belt that's going all the way from Georgia up to Pennsylvania. And that's industry and quality jobs coming in line in the United States that will provide the capacity for the transition to electric vehicles that is here and happening right now. All right, so the next I'd love to introduce Mayor Derek Wood. He's the mayor of Dumfries and a fellow Marine Corps veteran.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And Alex, I want to thank you for your leadership and the entire elected officials, Protecting America leadership, Christian, your mom, Ramona, everybody who worked so hard to keep our message at the forefront and making sure that we have an audience to get these type of policies changed into the forefront. And to all my esteemed colleagues, I can just say I attach myself to every comment you've made. I may try to duplicate and repeat some of those things because I think it's repetition is the mother of all learning, and it really puts a lot of emphasis on what we're trying to accomplish. So today, I really want to emphasize the critical need for EPA's new standards to help us really accelerate the transition to electric vehicles and a clean energy economy. This is just not about environmental stewardship. It's about creating opportunities. It's about fostering growth, and it's about securing a brighter future for all of our communities, including the town of Dumfries. Now, consider this as a integral part of our story. As a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a small business owner, I've always understood the importance of strong leadership. And that commitment to leadership carries through to my role as a mayor now, as a former council member, and our town's choice and every leader on this press conference choice to back the EPA stringent emission standards isn't just about rules and regulations, because God knows I'm a maverick. So it's not just about the rules and the regulations. It's about values. It's about service to our community. And I want to highlight a couple of points. One, I want to talk about accelerating the transition to electric vehicles, and why we need that EPA standard to help it is because it's not just about reducing emissions. It's about really embracing what's to come in the future right now, so that the future can move a lot faster and we can save our planet. Two, I want to talk about protecting public health and the national security, cleaning up our transportation sector. And I can speak as a member of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which we've funded billions of dollars in transportation and multimodal products. It's the transportation sector is one of the most dangerous pollutants, and it's going to become one of those vital steps in fighting the climate crisis that we all see and protecting our children and their children's future. It's about bolstering national security. It's about making all of our communities a place that's safer. Three, I want to talk about the environmental justice. We acknowledge that historically, communities of color living near these busy roads have bore the brunt of the pollution. Even in my community, we have a coal ash pond that the community is still fighting to get that coal ash moved and put into a landfill. And it's critical that we build now charging stations, which we have coming up at our place, effort to push more charging stations at any gas station that opens or any new business that opens. And these communities can ensure that clean energy infrastructure reaches.
May have lost the mayor for a second in his travels in Dumfries, the city you go to, not through, as he likes to say. But while he's reconnecting, I just want to underscore one of the reasons why we brought veterans here from across the United States is because of the security concerns we have. And I saw this first time when I was deployed to Iraq, actually. And one of the evenings when it's getting dark out, we had a curfew. We came across a line of cars, trucks, and tractors as far as the eye could see. And as we started to get to the front of the line, we began to realize they were waiting for gas for their vehicles and diesel. And it really struck me how the dependence on this single source of energy was making everyone there extremely vulnerable and actually rioted against us and put their lives in danger because they were so dependent on this single source of fuel. Ironically, in a country that is so rich with that fuel, because of the volatility associated with petroleum and the need to refine it and transport it in so many different ways. Electricity is so much more efficient and can make us much more secure as a nation, not be dependent on countries that frankly don't have our interests in mind and the volatility that it creates around it. Mayor Wood, are you back with us, or do you want to round it out?
Yes, sir. Listen, sorry, I forgot I had my thing sitting directly in the sun. That's, I mean, what better way to talk about environmental issues than to talk about a phone and a camera overheating while you're in the middle of a discussion, right? Because there's no air and I didn't have the clean energy blowing. I'm trying to remember the last point I left off with. I think I was talking about environmental justice.
Yes.
And I talked about, you know, that it's in our environmental justice, that it's about reaching everyone and rectifying those past injustices that was put in those communities that were disadvantaged, that didn't have the income or didn't have the infrastructure. Four, I want to talk about improved air quality and health, speeding up our transition to electric vehicles, I believe will significantly improve air quality, particularly in communities like mine that has long suffered from pollution-related health issues, you know, from lead in water to all of those other environmental issues. And that matter of the major vehicle pollutants that come is responsible for, I believe, thousands, and I think studies have shown thousands of premature deaths annually in the United States. Five, an investment in clean energy. I wanted to say thanks to our efforts, I believe, and all the efforts of everyone here, to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we're seeing now, I think we've never seen this, but we're seeing historical investments in clean energy and electric vehicle adaptations. We heard what's going on in New Mexico. We know California is leading. We see what's happening in Pennsylvania and even along this southern corridor of Virginia on down. And this includes a lot of the grants. It includes a lot of the rebates, the tax credits, to really entice a lot of the developers, the builders, and more people to make electric vehicle and this type of clean energy more accessible to all of our residents. Six, I want to talk about a national charging network, right? And so when you look at how the Jobs Act allocated funds to create a nationwide network of over 500,000 electric vehicles, I think we're talking over 500,000 charging stations. This promises equitable access to rural drivers and underserved communities, making electric vehicles a practical choice for more of my residents, and I'm pretty sure of everyone else's residents as well. The thing I really want to highlight is the job creation and the economic growth that this has, because these initiatives aren't just about the environmental benefits, and the environmental benefits are great enough, but these are a means of job creation and economic growth, which I know as elected officials is one of the most important things, is to make sure that we're driving the economy in our communities. I know my town is well positioned to be a leader in electric vehicle battery manufacturing. On some of the areas, we have some industrial area that can be developed. And I know a lot of these other areas, and it's going to foster a lot of sustainability and future growth that needs to happen. In closing, I just want to say, I believe that with all of all of the new acts and everything that's happened, I think we're on a path for a brighter future. I think a future with clean air, economic opportunities, and a resilient community is going to define all of our everyday lives. Just as I serve this nation with dedication, I'm committed to being a part of leading us toward a more sustainable and prosperous United States. Thank you, Alex, and let's continue this journey together, knowing that our actions today will shape a brighter tomorrow for all of us.
Excellent. And we will be sure to enjoy your barbecue when we come to Dumfries. He has a good story of how he was elected. So just rounding it out, we'll now take questions. I see a number of questions in the chat. If a member of the media would like to come into the camera, just raise your hand and we'll transfer you as a presenter as well. But I'm going to look here and we'll start with the theme overall of the press conference of how clean car standards, it will increase our national security. So whoever would like to jump in, please do.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. So for the national security aspect, similar to what I mentioned, again, like Alex mentioned as well, when we rely on somebody 6,000 to 7,000 miles away, we're relying on them to make sure that everything works correctly. They're acting in good faith and that everything is squared away. So one of the problems that we faced here in California, not necessarily so much of a national security issue, but kind of an idea of some of the problems that this creates. So a good chunk of our oil is found along the Central Coast, like San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and that stretches inward, inland into Kern County. And so one of the refineries had a malfunction and gas prices in the state immediately skyrocketed. It was basically overnight that the prices went up. And so, you imagine that with these pipes traveling, 200 miles away in either direction to get to the Bay Area or Los Angeles. And we felt that immediately. So imagine you add 6,000 miles to that. What's that going to do to our gas prices? And on top of that, too, you got to keep in mind, if we're working with some of these emissions, whether not emissions, but vehicles, or just operating on these, if the partner over in the Middle East decides they had enough of us, or again, in like the situation here in California, where there was a maintenance malfunction, we're going to feel those prices skyrocket immediately. So again, it's just going to hurt the average consumer at the pump back home. And then again, we're at their mercy of them trying to fix it or get it right or act in good faith.
Joe, did you have some?
Yeah, I'd like to add on. Great, thanks, Alexander. I always remind my students back in 1919 when Winston Churchill was converting his fleet from coal to oil. He said he was going into an area where security would be based on diversity, and diversity of sources. One thing about transitioning to electric power, think about all the sources of energy that create electric power: wind, solar, geothermal, natural gas, nuclear. I could go on. It's literally helping to hedge risk at a national security level by being able to integrate all these different types of primary energy sources into a single form, which is electric energy. And it is absolutely going to improve our energy security and our national security to make this transition so that, as Alex was saying, we're not completely dependent on a single form of energy for any one function. So thanks, Alex.
Great. Assembly member, Senator Barber.
Yes, I just want to also add to the on national security that the extreme weather events is also part of this, and we've seen quite a bit, and that's what drives mass migrations. But it also, threatens our populations. We've had communities here that have been completely devastated and had to function after one of these events, or extreme weather events, and we're seeing more as time goes on, and it does threaten our populations, and we have to have federal government respond, and is responding right now as we speak to a number of different things. So that really limits our resources, our nation at a significant loss to have to continually recover what we have seen in the past, just destruction of entire communities.
Yeah, and sadly, one of the greatest examples of what's happening is Ukraine, right? So and Europe was extremely dependent on the single source of energy, and now it's a choke point. When we looked at convoys, when I was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, 1 out of 24 convoys had a casualty, and the two things they transported was water and oil. Unfortunately, the same thing as the choke points of the energy security in Ukraine. Russia targets the electric and oil and gas infrastructure, and these are very hard to defend. Right? When there's a pipeline, it's easy to blow up. A refinery is easier to hit. But distributed energy, like that's powering the electric vehicles, is much more resilient. It's almost impossible to take out distributed solar. Wind turbines take $1 million for Russia to take out a single turbine because of the type of missile they need to use. And when they hit the solar field, it was back up in 2 days. And Ukraine built 19 wind turbines in a combat zone. So this type of energy that's going along with the theme here that folks are saying is much more resilient and creates more security locally and globally. So I see a number of questions that focus on the health benefits to the communities, particularly environmental justice health benefits, as well as the economic benefits between batteries. So since we're running low on time, would any of the gentlemen here like to comment on the health or environmental benefits focused with the transition to EVs and particularly the standards?
Sure, I can jump in on that too. So in California, one of our biggest arteries is I-5, Interstate 5, and it goes all the way from the top of the state all the way down to San Diego. And as you start to get into like Kern County, Bakersfield, or like Fresno, places like that, majority of these communities are Black and brown, overwhelmingly are Black and brown, but also largely agriculture too. So I-5, especially when you get into like the Bakersfield area, is known as our Cancer Alley, because it's a lot of the intersections for the state where you have a lot of diesel trucks going up and down the state, as well as travelers who are going from either my neck of the woods here in the Bay Area to Los Angeles. And because of this concentrated area, most of this obviously is in a valley. The air doesn't really circulate like that. So when you have the pollutants coming out of the tailpipe of the car, it's basically just hovering and just sitting over these areas. So as you go through like this Interstate 5, you'll see that rates of asthma significantly increase because, again, just a stagnant air that's circulating that area, and just the overwhelming large presence of cars that are constantly on the road back and forth. So from a standpoint of the health side of it, it decreases asthma rates because, one, you don't have these emissions flowing out. And then two, in terms of the environment, it's not keeping them in just basically in that trapped bubble. Outside of California, an example of what that kind of looks like is the city of Salt Lake City. One of the biggest problems that they have with their air quality is because they sit in that valley, in that mountain range, that the air can't circulate itself and push out the pollutants.
Yeah, as we said earlier, tailpipe pollution contributes to the 85 to 200,000 premature deaths, depending on the study, which tragically is harming communities of color and the disadvantaged communities in a much greater effect than others across the United States. And so this proposed rules will be able to protect these communities from these devastating health effects. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I'd like to Just that, I mean, that's an economic deficiency. I mean, morally, we want to make sure everybody has a healthy life, but in an environment where we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that are opening, and people are ill, and even worse, even dying from these preventable air emissions. This is an economic problem that this is a great way to address our shortage in jobs is to keep people alive, and we can do it, and we should do it.
Yeah, one of the amazing things about this is it's a win-win-win, right? So we can increase our security, increase our health, and increase our economic prosperity. Assembly member.
Yes, I'll just add, again, going back to the weather events and the fires in Canada and the smoke here and across the Northeast. It's interesting because my Apple Watch has that air quality that comes up on my screen face, and I never really paid attention to it too much until it come by, and it actually gave off a warning that the air quality was unsafe. And you saw some of the pictures, it looked like a picture from Mars, like it was just everything was orange. We had to issue emergency warnings to tell people to stay inside. It's just unsafe to breathe, and we had to stay inside and try and avoid even being outside for quite a long time to clear it up. So as you can see, these events happening are affecting air quality, and if people outside during that time, they may see damage to their lungs or long-term health effects. So it's all around. You can see health benefits from the extreme weather events to the from cleaning up the emissions that are put into the air as well. So a piece here of what we experienced in New York.
Yeah, I was in DC at the same time. It was very eerie to look over the Pentagon and see it look like it was something out of The Fifth Element or Mars. So, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating in the press conference. A couple of our members had to join hearings or committee meetings. But thank you for sticking around for the end and taking the time to answer very thoughtful questions. If members of the media have follow-up, please do reach out to Alex at protectingamerica.net or Ramona at protectingamerica.net. And we will look forward to continuing the conversation.